tonight, Billy N. from West Palm, Florida. You're welcome.
Oh, it's a little bright here. I'm Billy, I'm an alcoholic. My home group, most importantly, and more important than my sobriety date, is the Tell It Like It Is group. My sobriety date is January the 5th of 1990. I say that because home groups have become kind of out of fashion in Alcoholics Anonymous. We've become a very meeting-based society, and I love meetings more than a dedicated group-based society. So let me get a disclaimer out of the way. At this time in my life, I am honored to be here tonight. But this is a podium, not a pedestal. I'm a weak, broken, frail human being prone to do things to shame me. Let's start right there. Like, I've already gone through the phases in AA where I become the Taliban and know what's best for everybody, or I become God, I know better for everybody. So I honestly tell you that it's a real gift, I feel, in life today, that I can enjoy an uncomfortable seat with a horrible cup of coffee anywhere in the world and witness God's grace happening regardless of what I have to do with anything. And I tell you that because what a place of freedom it is to not have to be in charge of everybody else. Like, how you get sober is absolutely none of my business. Unless you invite me in. Then you're an idiot. I don't know what to say. If you invite me in to not mind my own business, then you've opened yourself up. But even at that point, all I have to offer is what I do. Our whole book and history boils down to that it's a past tense program. The only thing I'm allowed to do is tell you what I have done, not tell you what you should do. That means I'm not in the relationship business. I'm not in the telling you how to dress business. I'm not in the telling you what to do for a living business. My book makes it very clear. All of that, really the big book at the end of the day, because I am the big book thumper of big book thumpers, but what it has eventually told me is that it says, Billy, it's like a letter from God. Dear Billy, there are two kinds of business. Your business and none of your business. And unfortunately, my problem my whole life is I love to make what's not my business. And what should be my business, I then love to be unaccountable and irresponsible. I don't know if there are any meetings in Denver. I used to come to a lot of meetings here. I knew a lot of people back in the day here. I love the meetings, especially where there's a lot of new people that say, no profanity here. I always think about that from when I was a teenager getting sober, like, what a dumb statement with a lot of beginners in Alcoholics Anonymous in the room. Like, I needed a dictionary to relearn because I didn't know I had a problem of making up my own definitions of words until a sponsor helped me with a dictionary. But when I was 14 years old and came to AA and heard no profanity, profanity to me was job, school, responsibility, accountability. Like, that was profanity. And so, I honestly tell you here tonight that, I can only share with you my experience. And give another disclaimer. If you came here tonight to hear about, like, I don't know, essential oils, crystals, breathing exercises, yoga, whole bunch of other stuff, that is great additions to sobriety and AA. Those are great cherries on top. But if you're a real alcoholic, I hate to break it to you that you are dying if you are new. You basically, even though when you looked in the mirror because you were coming to the big Saturday night meeting in Denver and you made sure you looked okay and dressed okay and know who's going to be there, if you're new, you basically have an intubation tube in your mouth. You basically have a doctor with a crash cart with two handles, with two, cords in the hand. There's 3 nurses behind them, especially when you get sober young. And I can see there's a lot of young people here. Like, there's no worse place in the world to be when you're a real alcoholic and you're young than to be mentally sick and physically healed. I mean, that was my story from age 14 to 23. Because the younger you are, the quicker you physically heal. But you still have this sick, distorted mind, which I'm not saying it goes away, but a little at a time. So, there's what I believe AA is. For me, like I said, none of my business what it is for you, but I'm not afraid to honestly share what it is. So, I know there's a lot of things out in the parking lot, a lot of cars. Let's start right here. There is one thing that is not in the parking lot, no matter how much the modern recovery world wants to fill people's heads up with nonsense. My disease is not in the parking lot doing push-ups, okay? Unfortunately for you, my disease is right here with you. I don't ever get to leave it. But I wasn't raised in this victimology. You will always be broken, Alcoholics Anonymous. And I came here a diehard atheist. I was raised in that God can do for you and will do for you. And you don't have to worry about somebody telling you your disease is in the parking lot doing push-ups, because that comes from the same people who tell you that time doesn't matter. I used to say time doesn't matter when I was 16 years old at a table in a diner with 10 other people, where if you added up all our days and multiplied it by 10, we didn't have 90 days altogether. That group of people loves to say time doesn't matter. Now, I'm not here to say time means quality or emotional sobriety. Of course, people with time have all kinds of challenges. But if you are a real alcoholic, I want to stress that there is a difference between us and other people. I have a fellow executive at work that I'm very close with, and I just want to start out just so I don't forget later on. But at the end of every week, and usually a couple times during the week, we talk to each other. What's going on at work, what's going on with people, whole bunch of things. Unfortunately, he has a son like me when I was a teenager. I will wear you out. I will wear you out if you're my parent. I will wear you out if you're my teacher. I will wear you out if you're my guidance counselor. I will wear you out if you're my probation officer. That's my DNA. And if I'm drinking, forget about it. But this other executive that I work with, that I'm good friends with, he's not an alcoholic. He has a son that's been trying to wear him out. Alcohol does for him what it was intended to do. Take the edge off. Maybe a nice reward at the end of a long work week or a long day. He gets to have a glass of wine or a Heineken or whatever. And he mysteriously comes to work the next day. Doesn't disappear on payday. Like he has all these things that I find as difficult as climbing Mount Everest that he's able to do. And the reason for that is that I would just like to tell you that there are a whole bunch of people in the world tonight in Denver who had a bad week, whose kids gave them a hard time, who are suffering from depression, who were raised in bad households, whose marriages may be falling apart. And those people are allowed to use alcohol in its intended purpose. People get mad about the term real alcoholic, but the reason the term real alcoholic is so important is we don't get the liberty that those other people get. Those other people get a liberty because they do not suffer from the phenomenon of craving. See, when they take a drink, believe it or not, they start to not want to drink. When I take a drink, it's like lighting a stick of dynamite. I do not know where it's going to end. It took me a long time to realize that there are two kinds of people in the world: people who can drink and people who can't drink. And the people who can't drink, we will do anything possible to be a person who can drink. I kind of compare it to people who like to get up early in the morning. I get up early in the morning, and I've had to for my career for like 25 years now. But I am not naturally wired to be what some people refer to as a morning person. I was not naturally wired that way. I am willing to do anything to get up on time except go to bed early. Like, go to bed early seems like giving up on life to me. Like, I'm definitely going to miss something going on if I go to bed early. So I'm willing, like my drinking and going to bed early, I'm willing to do anything. I'm willing, before there were cell phones, to set an alarm clock on the other side of the room. I'm willing to set 3 alarms. I'm willing to do all this stuff except go to bed early, which is the whole story of my life from age 14 to 23. I'm willing to do anything to get sober except stop drinking. How crazy is that? I mean, that is literally like a textbook definition of you're out of your mind, right? And that's why I say to people, you know, when you've been in AA for a little while, you get to know the lingo, the code, what goes on at meetings. And if you're like me and you're having a little trouble with the criminal justice system, especially for 9 years for me, the juvenile and adult correctional probation departments from age 14 to 23, it's good to get to know the lingo in AA, to drop that at an appropriate time, you know, to have a couple of bombs, to have a mic drop in the drug court room, in the DWI room with your probation officer, be able to throw out things like, oh yeah, I went to a big book meeting, I went to this meeting, I went to that meeting. It's good to get to know the lingo. The lingo doesn't get you sober. And, you know, age 14 to 23, when I was a teenager, if I saw you get out of your car with your own big book, I would know you were a lunatic. I would know that you're some egomaniac, because we have books at the meeting. You don't need to bring your own. And I know that you're going to open it up, and there's going to be all kinds of like highlighting that's going to shine into my eyes from across the room, different color highlighting, right? And if you're really over the top, you'll have some leather binder on it with your name like in the leather, and maybe a spot for your coin, right? We all know those people, right? I have one of those now, right? But when I was a teenager, I would never talk to you if I saw you get out of your car like that, ever. Because I suffered from something that almost killed me, like alcoholism. I was too cool to get sober. I didn't know there was such a thing. A guy when I was 17 years old told me in a parking lot, he said, Billy, you know, you're a pretty nice kid, but unfortunately you might be too cool to get sober. And that's a shame. And today, if I'm uncomfortable in a meeting, there's a good chance that pretty much 90% of the time, if I really am uncomfortable in a meeting, It's because there is a young man in my eyesight who's too cool to get sober. Because when you've been too cool to be sober, you can spot it across the room. You know everything about being too cool to be sober. That you're never on time for anything. Maybe sober softball, but nothing else. You're never on time for the meeting. If there's some hot girl outside still smoking, I'm staying out there smoking. If I come in, I'm not going to be quiet when I'm late. I'm going to fist bump, high five, get a cup of coffee, be as disruptive as possible. Cool people don't get sober. It's just a fact. And I hated that guy. He had already told me like the year before out in the parking lot, he was like, you know, Billy, I thought you said last week your license was suspended. I said, oh, it is suspended. He said, but you drove here tonight. I said, oh, I know. I needed to go to a meeting. And he was like, oh, we don't do that here. And I was like, I thought he was crazy. I was like, you don't do what here? He's like, no, believe it or not, we start to follow the law. Like that speed limit sign, there is not a note on the back that says except for Billy. Believe it or not, it's for everyone, including you. I hated him. I never wanted to talk to him. You know, I come from a very alcoholic family, and I know today that does not make me an alcoholic. Now, a lot of other crazy things it taught me that have required lots of inventory and lots of professional help. So let me get that little public service announcement out. If you run into someone in AA who tells you not to get professional help, please run away. Please find someone who has knowledge of the steps and the traditions and our literature. Please find someone who knows that in AA we deal with alcoholism. That's what we deal with. But there's a lot of us who have very messed up minds. Or I don't say crazy things like there are no victims, only volunteers, because I know the way the odds work out, there are a few victims in this room. And how dare I be so arrogant that maybe something happened to you that you had nothing to do with? I'll never say that. But I also won't tell you that AA can fix that. I'll tell you that you need to get some professional help. But I come from one of those crazy families. And, you know, when I was saying you get to know the lingo, and one of the things you get to know is the code. Are you a friend of Bill's? That's the code. It works in the gym, on a cruise, in the bank, at Home Depot. You hear someone drop some little spiritual bomb, little word or two, and when you're next to them alone, you're like, are you a friend of Bill's? Why, yes, I am. But I'm here to tell you, I don't care if you're a friend of Bill's. I care if you have an intimate relationship with Fred or Jim, preferably both, in the chapter more about alcoholism. Like, do you know Fred and Jim? Because Fred and Jim saved my life. That chapter, along with the doctor's opinion, saved my life. And I'll get into how that happened. But you know, this Irish Catholic family I come from, which that doesn't make me an alcoholic, but I'll just tell you who they are. 42 first cousins, not a lot where I come from. My mom had 9 siblings, my dad 7. It's like 4.2 kids each, set of aunts and uncles before divorces. And my dad was a deep cover narcotics agent. My mom, most of my childhood, and him a raging alcoholic, violent maniac. My mother, most of my childhood, an untreated codependent, untreated Al-Anon, which, by the way, get a little disclaimer out, because there's sometimes 2 people in particular I really piss off when I speak. Now, I mean to fix it before I'm done speaking, right? But I go on a tangent and I forget and they leave resentful. So let me get rid of that right now. If you're a social worker, I love you. I think you serve an immense benefit to the world. I'm the chairman of the board of the largest homeless mission in the United States. I think social workers are amazing. But you're looking at a man who has never been invited to a meeting with a social worker where I got good news, ever. In my life, if there is a social worker invited to a meeting, somebody is going to tell me something that I am not going to like. So that's the first group. Second group is if there's any members of the Worldwide Fellowship of Al-Anon Family Groups in Alateen. You're amazing, but I'm a chronic teenage alcoholic. Like you hear other people in AA say there's nothing worse than a belly full of booze and a head full of AA. That's not my story. My story is there's nothing worse than a belly full of booze and my mother's head full of Al-Anon. Because if you are a teenage alcoholic and your mother finds Al-Anon, it is like the worst. The worst. What they teach women, mothers at Al-Anon, because when I'm speaking in a like lit up hotel room and I can see the audience, I can pick out the Al-Anon mothers who have a son like me or a daughter. I can even tell the difference between the ones whose kids got sober and the ones who are still out there. But I have the greatest respect in the world for Al-Anon family groups. Now, when I started drinking, I have to define that because my family. So, if this was a beer and I was drinking it, in my family, that is not drinking. I know, that sounds crazy. That's like hydration. When I use the term drinking, I am talking about going on a mission. That usually starts at, I preferably like to get up at 4:30 in the afternoon. I like to have at least one cigarette left on my nightstand that I can light before my feet hit the ground and stumble out to Dunkin' Donuts or 7-Eleven to get a coffee or an iced tea and a fresh pack of cigarettes. That's how I like to wake up to the world, even though it's almost nighttime. I love everything to do with chaos. I also love, even way before cell phones, I suffer from this problem when I am drinking that I know something better is going on someplace else. That wherever I am, even if I thought it was the greatest party in the world, somehow or another I get information that something better is happening someplace else. Story of my life. That's why I love these wood podiums. For those of you who were not arrested back in the day, today it's scary, I have 1 undergraduate, 2 graduate degrees, 21 professional license in 21 states, so I have to get fingerprinted sometimes. Now they have these nice kind of electronic machines. Back in the day when you went into a police station, you had a podium in front of you. It had clips on the side of it. It was slanted like this so the ink would go across. There was a roller that the police officer would roll across. He would hold your hand behind here and he would hold your finger. And I've noticed that too about people, especially, I'm a young person who got sober. Our stories, our alcoholism is the same, but our stories are different. Like when I get sent to have my fingerprints taken, most people, believe it or not, have never had their fingerprints taken. So it's kind of shocking for them, So when I go to get my fingerprints taken and I show up at the sheriff's department and I already have my hand behind my back and I already have the fingers in the right order, right? I'm rolling the fingers in the right order with my thumbs, with my 4 fingers, know which way on the card, which box has which finger. We have certain knowledge here that the rest of the world doesn't have, But when I say drinking, I can't tell you what my first drink was. All I know is that my whole life, my dad drank wherever we went. All I know is that my whole life, going to Islander games, going to Ranger games, going to Yankees games, going to Jets games, maybe I should give a PSA there too, AA and the steps are so powerful that I am a New York Jets fan, have not had to drink in the last 35 years. Think about that for a second. Think about how high my hopes have been made at the beginning of every season for 35 years, only to have that ripped out from under me. And yet I'm still here today. Amazing. But my dad measured trips by beers, not miles, not hours. How many tall boys? How many six-packs? I have a very unusual relationship with alcohol, a very abnormal relationship. Some of the things I'll tell you about myself I'm not proud of, I'm not bragging. But I was 40 years old and 17 years sober when I found out or realized that the rest of the world believes that having one six-pack in a night is excessive drinking. Did you know that? I had no idea. A six-pack. I had no idea. And I think of that because by the time I became a senior in high school, I had to see the school psychologist 1 hour a week to stay in high school. And I remember one time he had gotten me out of a jam, and I looked at him and I said, "You know what, Dr. Pavi? This weekend, I'm going to be such a good guy. I'm only going to have a six-pack on Friday night and a six-pack on Saturday night." I really thought like I deserved the Medal of Honor. Meanwhile, I become 40 years old and I'm surrounded by lots of normal, healthy people. They have like 2 drinks. When I switched doctors 2 years ago, the application or the patient information thing had a thing about drinks per week. 0 to 10. How disappointing is that? 10? Like that is your upper limit? Like, I understand 0. You can't get less than 0. But how could 10 drinks a week be the maximum? Crazy. I saw a movie a couple of years ago, maybe not a couple, 12 years ago, and that movie kicked my ass. It was one of those movies where you leave the movie theater and you feel like you just wrote 2 pages of really hard inventory. And it reminded me of just some things, that I didn't think about or hadn't talked about in a long time. See, because when you get sober, you want to talk about things that make you seem cool for the podium. Tough, not weak, helpless. But, I was thinking about that because of when I started drinking, because if you work with a lot of men, particularly my niche is young men, 16 to 25, with horrible attitudes and authority problems. That's my niche. Not that I want it, believe it or not. Every young guy I have to deal with is a crime lord of vast proportions. Even though they're not in prison, they're having a cigarette with me outside on the Oasis picnic table, but apparently they run a vast underground empire wherever they come from. Everyone, it's amazing. But you get to know things about people. Like I know what makes me an alcoholic. I suffer from the physical craving after I take a drink. I have the allergy. I suffer from the mental obsession and the spiritual malady. There's a lot of other things that don't make you an alcoholic, but sure do seem to be common around here. Kind of run in the AA member DNA, Like I know the ones for me. It would have been much better when I was born if the nurse came into the room with my mother and said, "Mrs. N, we're going to take your son to a place on the other side of the hospital called the detox. It's going to save you 20 years of misery. We're just going to send him there now," right? Like I'm well aware of who I am. But there's some other things that I'm well aware of. If you tell me not to do something, I am guaranteed to do it from a young age. If you tell me not to go somewhere, I am going there. If you tell me to do something without a valid reason why I need to do it, I am never doing it. And worst of all, if you tell me not to hang out with a particular person, I know that God put them on earth for me. Right? I know it. And I got caught cheating on this test when I was in 6th grade. And I was in a room with my mother, my principal, my teacher, and the good old school social worker. And, they didn't find any notes written on my hand or my wrist, no cheat sheet in my pocket. Nobody saw me look at anybody next to me to the left or right to cheat. The teacher just told my mother that I'd gotten 100 on this particular exam, that there was no way that somebody who acted as badly as me in class and as bad as I did in the cafeteria and as bad as I behaved on the schoolyard and as bad as I behaved walking to and from school, there's no way I could have gotten 100 on that test. That was the logic. And, when I went into 7th grade, I got put into all these special classes with adjectives before them. Honors English, accelerated math. Now, right before junior high, one of these older kids that my mother would say, don't ever hang out with them when we went to the supermarket, he came up to me and said, Billy, we're having a party in the woods on Friday night. Why don't you come? I was like, of course I want to come to the party in the woods on Friday night. I have this mysterious ability that even if I don't know what something is, if it's bad and society believes that it's evil, I know I'm going to love it, right? It's a unique ability that you have, that you figure that you have. Like, if the rest of the world thinks it's immoral, I'm going to love it. It's just the way it goes. And, that night in the woods changed my life. Changed my life. 4 things, particularly. There was a bonfire in the woods. I'd never been to a bonfire in the woods. There was heavy metal music in the woods. Sabbath, Ozzy, Zeppelin, Floyd, Molly Hatchet, even some Southern rock. There was alcohol in the woods, and there were girls in the woods. And I know I'm pleading guilty to being the shallowest person you ever met, okay? So just, you judge all you want. But I know that by the day after that night in the woods, if all my life ever became was another night out in the woods, another bonfire, more girls, more metal, and more alcohol, my life would be fine. I did not need anything more than that. Now, I'm in accelerated math. I'm having a difficult time. I did not dress like the rest of the kids in accelerated math. My uniform of the day when I was in junior high was black engineer boots, Levi's dungarees or corduroys, some kind of heavy metal t-shirt, a pack of Marlboro Red slid down the front of my pants. If it was the winter, a white thermal shirt under my black heavy metal shirt. I had a Levi dungaree jacket with a Diary of a Madman oil painting on the back of it. That's how I faced school every day. And see, because I realized, and I'm not telling you to brag, because here's the thing I also know about myself. I make certain discoveries that for other people would be good and positive, and I use them for the absolute worst possible motives or circumstances. See, after that little thing with getting caught cheating and See, I escaped my family insanity by reading, even if I could only read the encyclopedia if that was the only thing there. But I knew by the time I was in 6th grade that I remembered everything I read. Like, the only way I can describe it to you is if you've seen the movie Queen's Gambit or the show The Queen's Gambit, the way she sees an upside-down chessboard is the way I see books or what I read, or my memory is not actually as good as it used to be, but whatever they considered having a photographic memory, that's what I supposedly had. And then I knew that I could do difficult math in my head and really difficult math on a small piece of paper. So, I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you that because by the time I was in 7th grade, I made some decisions. I don't need to bring books home. I don't need to study. I can party whenever I want. I'll just do well on tests. And, my dad had driven my mother to Al-Anon, and then my mother was already in Al-Anon when he left the house. I was so resentful at my dad because he got like this horrible bachelor apartment that he drank his ass off in every night. But he didn't have my mother nagging at him anymore. I had his wife, my mother, now nagging at me every night about my drinking. And some people and that's why I stressed about having so much respect for other people in AA and their stories. I know I've heard people in AA say, God, they came to their first AA meeting and they felt right at home. I did not feel at home. I did not feel like I fit in here. I felt like I was with all the church freaks, to be perfectly honest. Now, what had happened to me is I wound up in juvenile court at 14 years old, and the judge asked me to make a decision. And truthfully, today, I would have made a different decision based on the information I have today. But at the age of 14, I was a never institutionalized 14-year-old alcoholic teenager, but never institutionalized. So when that judge gave me a choice, and he seemed to not care, he did not take any of my manipulation, he did not take any of my guilt or blame. Someone had told him that young men and women could be alcoholic. Thank God. Because that's the other people you should run away from. Anyone that tells you in AA young people can't be alcoholic, run away from them as well. But he gave me a choice. I could do all these rules and sign a contract with my mother, or I could go into a juvenile correctional facility. And he explained to me that in that juvenile correctional facility, he wouldn't have to worry about me not going to school anymore because the school was inside the juvenile correctional facility. And he wouldn't have to worry about me going to school but cutting class because there was nowhere to hang out, cutting class. So he explained all that to me, and I made the decision to go with the rules for one reason. I was petrified I would not be able to drink. See, people throw the word progression around. I know what progression is for me. Progression for me means that when I was in 9th grade, the only thing I thought about on a Monday morning is, where are we drinking and partying Friday night? Whose parents are away? Who has fake ID? Whose older brother or sister can buy us what we need? And by the time I was in 10th grade, what separated me from everybody else is that I knew I could not make it to Friday night. Friday night might as well have been next summer. Like, I need to drink by Wednesday, hopefully Tuesday. So I chose the rules, believe it or not. And my mother took a Jesus magnet and put him on the refrigerator, that I won't smoke in the house anymore, I'll go to school on time, I'll get a job, I'll take the garbage out on Tuesdays and Thursday nights, whole list of nonsense. And the last one was that I would attend meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. AA was a smoker's paradise at that time, which I love at the time. And it's funny because AA is such a unique place. Like, I've been here a long time now. I've spent over 75% of my life around or in AA. There's certain things that happen here that happen nowhere else in the world. They're totally unexplainable. I'll give you one. The hall monitor who caught me smoking in the bathroom when I was in 11th grade and took me to the principal's office, right? 2 weeks later, she gave me a cigarette at the Friday night speaker meeting. Where else in the world do those things kind of happen? Like, she knew at work she had her job to do, but at AA, she was my fellow AA buddy. I went to my first anniversary meeting when I was 16 years old. I only went because I knew the only way I could manipulate my mother was by she wanting a sober son. That's what she wanted in the worst way. It took me years to understand the parents of alcoholic children and young people. I never understood why my mother always said that she liked it better when I was locked up because at least she knew where I was. I never knew the pain and the fear of the Al-Anon parent who doesn't know where their child is. I told my mother I heard about this anniversary meeting. Big deal, Mom. Everybody goes. I was grounded again and I wanted to smoke. But she took me. Took me means I was so cool, I made her drop me off down the street. I'm not getting out of my mother's car at an AA meeting. And I walked to the meeting. Place is filled with smoke. I'm 16 and a half years old. This old lady in a room like this, except it was in a church basement, turns the lights down halfway. She was like 34. This old guy brought a cake in with candles on it, and all these church freaks started singing happy birthday. And he was like 40, right? And I'm sitting there, honestly, I'm like 26, 36, 46, like, even if I live till 46, this is gonna be my big night out of the month. The last Friday night of the month anniversary meeting. It's what I got going for me every month. Big meeting with the old lady turning the lights down halfway and the guy with the candles, like, this is what my life has come to. And I tell that story because I hope that there's someone new here who hates AA as much as I hated AA. I know you don't hate AA more than I hated AA, but you might hate AA as much as I did. Because I want to admit to you that I was wrong. I want to tell you that I have never been more wrong in my life. When I thought you were going to rip my party away, when I thought you were going to take my life away, I've seen Metallica live. I have to get the exact count, but it's over 50. Last year, I think I saw Tool live over 10 times. I saw the Yankees beat, I know I saw some Birds hats here, so I apologize for this story, but I saw the Yankees beat the Phillies in 2009 in the World Series, and here's the miraculous part of that story. I was in the stadium for the third out of the ninth inning. That might not be a big deal for regular people, but I have a problem with gatherings of large people in stadiums, whether they're sporting events or music events. I tend to have difficulties there. Remember the people I told you, like God put that person on earth? that usually shows up as some tragic female for me, who I should never have met in my entire life, right? And what usually happens is I hear some noise behind me, and I turn around, and there's a bunch of guys in yellow windbreakers. And one of them is talking to somebody who is pointing at me. And then they ask me to leave the stadium and sign a trespass form that I'll never come back there, right? So I went to the World Series and was there for the final out. I have ridden my motorcycle through all the great mountains of the United States and Canada. I was so wrong. So wrong. Now, God has the greatest, last year, over one Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday, I went out. Let me stress, I was not at Coachella. But I was at the India Fairgrounds for what they call Power Trip. And on Friday night, Iron Maiden and Guns N' Roses played. And on Saturday night, Judas Priest and AC/DC played. And on Sunday night, Tool and Metallica played. And I went there all weekend, 34 years sober, with an iced coffee and a cigar, with the 10-step promises in my life that I recoil from alcohol like a hot flame. I've been given the greatest life in the world. So let me tell you this in my last couple of minutes. Age 14 to 18, I was either suspended from school, on detention, put in study hall. When it comes to the New York State criminal justice system, 14 to 29, juvenile probation, adult probation, in custody on a violation of probation, sentenced inmate, my first 2.5 years of sobriety, on court supervision until I'm 29. I mean, young people who get sober, that's my story. You know what it's like to go back to college for the class that they make you take when you don't even get credit for, but they say you have to take just to get back into college? And you're 12 years older than everybody else in the class? How about this one? How about when you go because you've really pushed the limit with the criminal justice system and the motor vehicle department, where you have to retake your driver's license test in your 30s? You have to show up there, where all these kids are there with their mothers, and I'm there with the crazy guy from AA. And they're all there with their Audis and their BMWs, and I'm with the guy's beater, the car he could barely afford, his first in sobriety. Getting sober young, it's such a gift, but I think about the lessons that I learned. I was in a correctional facility, and I had gotten moved from a maximum custody facility to a minimum. And honestly, I wasn't doing well. I was sober. We had good AA. And we had really good AA in the minimum correctional facility. But I was having a temperament problem, is the nicest way I could say it. If I were to ever be incarcerated again, I'd do much better in a 2 or 3 person cell with a small little day area outside 10 cells on the tier, with a TV, and very little interaction with other human beings. When they transferred me to minimum, I do not do well in a room like this with 100 bunk beds, where I have to live in a community of men, okay? I was not meant to live in a community of men, where I have to tie my sneakers to my bunk bed in case anyone's stealing it in the middle. And I was never meant to live that way. But we had really good AA. At that time, I know I'm dating myself, which I hate to do. I had a Walkman. If you don't know what that is, It's a small rectangular thing that had a permanent earphone attachment that you could play cassettes in. I think the number one song at the time was either You Can't Touch This or Hammer Time. Like, I'm a heavy metal aficionado with a minor in early 90s hip hop, right? But the outside people from AA were allowed to bring in speaker tapes. And one day I grabbed one, and it said Tom I, Aberdeen, North Carolina. And I listened to that tape on my cot that week. And I listened to a man who killed 2 people drinking and driving when he was 23 and did 7 years in Jackson State Prison in Michigan, and became the first convicted felon in America to become the warden of a maximum custody penitentiary. Got sober at 23 years old. I went to his funeral last year. I just want to share something with you. Tom got sober young. He was one of those guys that would look me right in the eyes and say, you know, Billy, I've had a lot of problems in life, but cutting back on AA has never been the solution to any of them. He explained to me that there's really only 3 kinds of people who leave AA. There's those who don't do the steps or participate in the fellowship, both of them. There's those who are only in the fellowship that will never do the steps. They leave. And the group we never talk about, the expert big book thumper who talks negatively about the fellowship and meetings, who grows so angry with the rest of AA that they can't comfortably enjoy AA anymore, so they distance themselves. Tom taught me about 3 legacy AA membership. I went to Tom's funeral last year. I mean, when you think about how insane it is, he's a convicted felon. And at one point during his funeral, in a room just like this, the honor guard for the North Carolina Department of Corrections lined up back there. A trumpeter came in and played taps. A member of the honor guard with the flag of North Carolina knelt down in front of Tom's wife and said, on behalf of the state of North Carolina and a grateful governor. Like, where else do miracles like that happen? They just don't happen. I've been homeless in sobriety. You know, like, my life is very different today. I'm not one to shy away from that. God has blessed me in so many ways, even, you know, inside AA service, outside AA service. I raised my hand to be a GSR in 1993, and in 2017 rotated out as a Class B trustee and the chair of the AA World Services Board. I served as a delegate when I was 32 years old. I got very active in young people's conferences. I met Joe and Charlie when I was like 3 years sober, just out of being incarcerated. And you know what it's like when you go to a big book workshop. Everybody you hate in AA is there for like 100 miles. All the people I described with the leather covers and the coins and the highlighting, right? Like, but quoting the pages will not keep you or get you sober. You have to be an active member of AA. I don't need meetings. I want to attend meetings. This is the place where I see God's grace. This is where I'm able to witness it. You know, I love low-bottom young alcoholics. It's who I love. During COVID, like during lockdown COVID, when, you know, there was still those stickers on the supermarket floor about how many feet you could be from each person, you know, I was walking down the aisle and I passed the ramen noodle section. And I'm not talking about the gluten-free, high-end, organic ramen noodles. I'm talking about the ones that come in the square brick package like heroin. You know the ones I'm talking about? And you can buy them like 20 packages to a group, and they have a little thing of powder inside them, like dirt, that you cut open and you dump in the water so it gives them some kind of color and taste. Like, I love people who've lived on ramen noodles. I remember I got online during this meeting during COVID, and this guy sitting in his mansion in California, I know, I try not to judge, but I couldn't help myself. And he said, "Oh my God, I really know what it's like to be incarcerated now." And I'm sitting there like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I just took organic coffee beans I bought at Sprouts and ground them in my coffee grinder and made French press coffee. I've not been in a correctional facility that has coffee bean grinders and French press coffee. Like, this is nothing like being in a correctional facility. But you know what? I'm so arrogant. Maybe it is for him. Maybe we had different lives. You know, AA service, I learned how to use Excel on a young people's bid committee. I learned how to use WordPerfect, not even Word, on a young people's host committee. I learned how to negotiate contracts on an AA service committee. I also learned that if you can get something done in AA, you can get done anywhere. On a group level, a district level, a young people's level, anywhere. There's an old-time speaker named Peg M. She passed away a couple of years ago. She used to say the problem with alcoholics, I have the problem she describes. I land in West Palm Beach Airport all the time for work. I know exactly in the Premier parking lot where I park. I know that within like 3 minutes I can be going under the 95 sign to 95 North. And I just want to let you know that by the time I get to that 95 North sign, I've already told myself in detail, God, I have not seen Metallica enough this year. And I have not golfed enough. And I have definitely not ridden my motorcycle enough. And it's still that same stupid thing getting in my way, Alcoholics Anonymous. Like the very thing that has given me this entire life, my brain sometimes still wants to say, well, maybe Billy, maybe you're just too involved in AA. And I just want to share these two stories with you and shut up. The first is this, because a lot of people don't know it. But in 1998, the editors of Time magazine knew two things were going to happen in 2 years. They knew the world was going to close one century and start another. And they knew that Time magazine would turn 80 years old. And as a result, they hired a committee of 20 of the most eminent, smartest historians from all around the world. Not AA archivists, not AA historians, the real deal. They put them in a conference room for a couple of weeks, and they gave them one assignment. Start on January the 1st of 1900, up until today in 1998, and you need to come to agreement on the 80 most important days of the century. If you multiply 98 by 365, that's quite a few days. You can Google or eBay or whatever, search it. The book is called the 80 Days That Changed the World. You can still find it. I have one on my coffee table. Because if you go 15 pages into that book, in the section on the 1930s, you land on a picture of Bill and Bob, where it says, on June 10th, 1935, we celebrate as the birth of Alcoholics Anonymous, where a broken stockbroker from New York met a broken surgeon from Akron. And from that led to the birth of Alcoholics Anonymous, that has saved millions of alcoholics and shared their illness, their solution with people who have other problems. And sometimes I really need to ask myself, do I treat AA like its birth was one of the 80 most important days of the world, of the century? Like, all you got to do is go a couple of pages before or a couple of pages after to really give you a headache. Like, what are those people comparing this to? Well, they're comparing it to women get the right to vote. They're comparing it to D-Day. They're comparing it to Martin Luther King giving the I Had a Dream speech. They're comparing it to landing on the moon. They're comparing it to Harvey Milk in San Francisco. They're comparing it to the wall coming down in Berlin. Like, that's incredible. And the last thing I'll share with you in this, and shut up. You never know what your gift is. The problem in AA is everybody wants somebody else's gift instead of taking their gift and running with it. There's a lot of other gifts I want. I know mine is applying spiritual principles to business. So I serve on a lot of charity boards and I help a lot of non-AA organizations. But if you want to know who my ultimate hero is, it's a young man named Jay. Really John, but they called him Jay. And John was a young alcoholic in the 80s like me, except he got sober. He was a couple years older than me. 19 years old, 20 years old. And in 1983, John, like a lot of other people in Young People's AA today, was a young man or woman in the military. He was in the Marine Corps. And John got sent to Beirut. Very bad time to get sent to Beirut in spring of 1983. John had no literature with him. So he wrote the General Service Office through the military mail. Said, hey, I'm a young kid, I'm sober, I'm going out of my mind over here. There's no meetings, I got no literature. So they sent him literature and a letter. Typical writing, hey, if you ever in New York, stop by. John wrote him back after he got the literature and a letter. He said, hey, that's awesome, can you send me more literature? They sent him back more literature and wrote him another letter. Then John wrote him back again.